good afternoon or good morning, I guess, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Emily Springer, and I'm an academic trainer for the Center for Teaching and Learning. And we are very excited today to have one of our own alumni, Dr. Samantha Hedgspeth, who is going to be presenting today. And her webinar is The Pandemic Disruption: Is Tacit Knowledge on the Precipice of Extinction? And we have just a couple of housekeeping items, and then we will get over to her presentation. I know that several students and staff and faculty have noticed that we are moving our webinars from the NCU Commons to our LibGuides page. So I will provide a direct link of this recorded webinar should anybody request, and there's more news to come on where all of our webinars will be housed, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. It is on our webpage, but you will absolutely be able to have a copy should you request. And Dr. Hedgspeth has asked if you can have any of your questions in the Q&A. She will address them when she's done with her presentation. And that is really all I have for you today. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hedgspeth, and we're just so excited to have you present your information today.
Thank you so much, Emily. I greatly appreciate you all having me. So I will go ahead and share my screen that we can get started. Okay. Hello, I am Samantha Hedgspeth. As Emily stated, I specialize in organizational leadership in the area of tacit knowledge. Today we will talk about the pandemic disruption. Is tacit knowledge on the precipice of extinction? And if so, how can we remediate the risk? This is a qualitative overview of a very important piece of the puzzle for many organizations who are currently grappling for sustainability, post-pandemic outbreak in the all-virtual workplace. In my research entitled Millennials, Understanding the Challenges to Transferring Tacit Knowledge, I talk about how rolling into the 21st century, large organizations were suffering in the areas of productivity, competitive advantage, and future state sustainability due to the loss of tacit knowledge. With this pandemic, the loss of tacit knowledge traverses a much broader spectrum than just generational gaps. I believe this pandemic inherently ushered in the perfect storm for blocks of invaluable tacit knowledge to be lost if we are not careful. This discussion is to raise awareness of the latent risk at hand. In general, knowledge is a collection of expertise, relative context, and experiences. Knowledge is a main how-to construct of building blocks, if you will, that keeps productivity, processes, and legacies moving forward. Without knowledge, many pieces to numerous puzzles will be missing or disjointed. A sound foundation of knowledge accumulation and management facilitates innovation so that progressive versions of the knowledge contiguously and continuously emerges. Microsoft Windows is a prime example. When Microsoft first launched its Windows operating system, it was just called Windows. But because they have taken the accumulated knowledge, managed it, built upon it, we are now using Windows version 10. Apple does the exact same thing. The tech company accumulates and manages its knowledge, which enables the company to be agile and pivot in the marketplace. With great ingenuity of the managed knowledge, we are now using Apple iPhone 12. Google is another gleaming example of how organizations can pivot for profitability with managed knowledge. As of December 2020, Google Chrome accounts for approximately 66% of the global desktop internet browser market share. So as you can see, it literally pays to accumulate and manage your organization's knowledge. So the types of knowledge and their functionality are somewhat in the white space for organizations, meaning the types of knowledge are present but not the focal point of day-to-day operations. Let's talk about the types of knowledge to bring their importance to the forefront. There is explicit knowledge and there is tacit knowledge. The nature of explicit and tacit knowledge are polarized opposites. Both types of knowledge function, are weighted, and transferred differently. For example, knowledge is like an iceberg. Above the water table is explicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is easy to share, easy to transfer because it is codifiable. So instructions can be written and the knowledge stored for future reference, such as operating manuals or job aids. Explicit knowledge is acquired through formal learning. It is static information but can be updated. Conversely, tacit knowledge is what you do not see below the water table. Tacit knowledge is intuitive know-how and decision-making that is cultivated through years of experience and is categorized as a soft skill. Tacit knowledge is not codifiable and is acquired through informal learning. People with tacit knowledge often do not know they possess it because it is stored in their subconscious mind and is drawn out for use during a certain situation. So, with years of experience, organizational culture, systems, and social norms, tacit knowledge is a proprietary blend of knowledge for each organization. This proprietary blend of knowledge is an intangible yet invaluable asset that fuels the efficiency and effectiveness of overall performance and long-term competitive advantage. You get optimal use out of explicit knowledge when someone with tacit knowledge knows how to proficiently use the processes and systems set in place. So the conduit for transferring tacit knowledge is socialization, socialization, and more socialization, which can encompass a variety of activities such as working in close proximity, cubicle drive-bys, impromptu discussions, observations, water cooler chats, coaching, mentoring, just to name a few. Certain professions have historically seen the value in transferring tacit knowledge with their use of shadowing, internships, residencies, and on the job training. A warm transfer of tacit knowledge is an imperative because we know in certain professions, just having the book sense or explicit knowledge, the written instructions, is not enough to produce a favorable outcome. So let's pause here for a moment and just personally reflect. Can you think of an instance where you missed a tacit knowledge transfer? The situation may have felt like you were dealt a bad hand. Perhaps you started a new job and your predecessor was not there to give you a warm transfer. That meant you had to start from ground zero, take a chance, reinvent the wheel, and figure things out. It would have been of great value to you and the organization's productivity rate if you could have gotten that warm transfer at the very beginning. Did you know pre-pandemic, Fortune 500 companies were already losing an estimated 31.5 billion annually as a result of employees not sharing knowledge? Did you know pre-pandemic, heavily relying on contractors for key positions instead of employees makes an organization's proprietary knowledge fluid and sometimes not accessible to employees? I want to give you 2 points to really build this bullet out. For example, contractors are free to go at the end of their assignment, or contractors on a project can be reassigned to other projects with other companies, including your competitors. When that happens, an organization's proprietary tacit knowledge walks right out the door. My second point on this bullet is an actual story from when I was doing my dissertation. The organization in my study had a head count of 10,000 people, and a third of that head count was contractors. In a pre-qualifying discussion with a potential millennial interview candidate for the study, I asked her about her career goals and how her team shares information. Shockingly, she said the knowledge of how to do key functions on the team is not shared. She went on to state that the key positions on the team are held by contractors, and per company policy, contractors are not allowed to mentor employees because they are not employees. In this example, contractors were a hindrance to transferring tacit knowledge. Did you know pre-pandemic, 30 to 40 million baby boomers are projected to retire by the year 2025. And that is with or without them transferring their tacit knowledge. Did you know pre-pandemic, there was a talent shortage, or currently still the talent shortages going on in the marketplace, that is projected to crest at 35 million by 2025. That is a knowledgeable, skillful talent shortage and not just a body count shortage. In 2019, 1,028 organizations participated in a survey administered by SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management. SHRM stated in the 7-page report that 75% of those organizations were having difficulty finding skilled and knowledgeable job candidates. Did you know pre-pandemic, the workforce is projected to be 75% millennials in 2025? Again, that's with or without them having received a transfer of tacit knowledge. Generational gaps are key players in, hindering the transfer of tacit knowledge. Why? Because of cohort differences that are perceived or actual. The literature states that 50% of the younger employees are dismissive of the competencies of the older generations, and 70% of the older generation is dismissive to the younger employees. The generational gaps are fueled by differing communication styles, differing preferences, and so on. So the year 2025 is now less than 5 years away. In addition to the pre-existing hindrances to transferring tacit knowledge, we are still reeling in the throes of the pandemic outbreak. Are organizations aware or prepared for what can possibly happen next? The precipice. According to the dictionary, a precipice is a cliff with a vertical or nearly vertical overhanging face. It can also be defined as a situation of great peril. For example, being on the precipice of war. For a visual, the gentleman in the picture is sitting on the drop-off, a precipice, the place where solid ground meets the abyss. As previously mentioned, organizations need to keep their solid ground of tacit knowledge managed and growing so that they can build on it to contiguously create newer versions of their products and services. So, how is a pandemic, a precipice, and tacit knowledge relative? Glad you ask. Gone are the days, for now, of having the conveniences to observe or run into each other in the office and share experiences. So we have turned to technology to facilitate a virtual work environment. Technology facilitates a lot of things, but what technology does not facilitate is the transfer of tacit knowledge. In the findings of my research, technology emerged at the epicenter of hindrances to transferring tacit knowledge. So when the pandemic hit, I saw organizations at risk, on a precipice of losing invaluable proprietary knowledge, even more than ever before, because we are now technology dependent, not positioned for socialization. We are remote, siloed and immersed in our own personal cultures. And don't forget, our date with 2025 is less than 5 years away. This is a perfect recipe for losing tacit knowledge. Let's look at what can happen when tacit knowledge is lost. Two of our longest running examples of disruption in tacit knowledge are the pyramids of Egypt and Stonehenge of Wiltshire. Thousands of years later, today's scientists can only speculate about how these behemoth structures were built. The ancient societies did not have modern day cranes nor other commercial equipment for the heavy lifting and volume of masonry. Somewhere in the life cycle of those societies, the tacit knowledge of how to build these incredible structures was not transferred and lost forever, unless you know how to build a pyramid from scratch. Don't think this is a real issue in the 21st century? Let's look at more contemporary examples. Ratliff studied the impact of not transferring tacit knowledge from baby boomers to the younger generation in the 45th Space Wing of the U.S. Air Force. The Eastern Launch Range manages the systems that support critical space missions, such as the launching of commercial and military satellites, solar research flights, and crew-occupied shuttle missions. The gap in the knowledge transfer between the generations became evident when in 2013, workers in space tried to retrieve information on how to solve for problems previously resolved by the baby boomers, but with no success. The previous residents did not leave a repository of tacit knowledge behind because there is no such repository. Tacit knowledge is not codifiable. Difficult to harvest, it is a soft skill in the minds of knowledge holders and is shared in informal interactions via observation and not stored in physical databases. The younger engineers had to reinvent the wheel, figure things out while in space. In like manner, the Bethune study was conducted on the U.S. Aerospace and Defense Department. In this qualitative case study, Bethune emphasized intergenerational knowledge transfer. Bethune states that with the retiring workforce of the baby boomers comes a potential loss of intellectual capital. What I found out in this study is that in 2014, 1.7% of the aerospace workforce engineers retired. It was only 1.7% of the workforce, so no big deal, right? Wrong. Houston, we have a problem. The negative impact of 1.7% of retired engineers postponed another 40% of the remaining eligible workforce from retiring for a few years until they could transfer the invaluable tacit knowledge to the new engineers. From this discovery, Bethune considered the crux for organizations is how to convert personal knowledge into the organization's knowledge. How will organizations cascade their tacit knowledge to future generations of virtual new hires? So, Emily, if you could please launch the poll, I greatly appreciate it.
Yes, of course.
That's great. So, everyone, we have just a one question poll. Can you see the precipice or the concept of there being a precipice of losing tacit knowledge post-pandemic outbreak in the all virtual workplace? It is a yes or no. We'll give you just a moment. And so, Emily, will it show the total number of responses?
Yes, right now there are about 22 and growing responding yes, and about 2 responding no.
Okay.
It looks like about 75% of people have voted, and we're closer to 30 as yes and 2%, and 2 people as no.
Excellent, excellent. So, good. I guess I'm explaining correctly.
And
Oh,
about 85% of the vote is in. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll if that's okay.
yes, please.
All right.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you all so much for taking that poll. And we're going to move forward. And so, fast forwarding, let's see, maybe the poll is still up. It's, oh, okay, I see here. I see here. Yeah, oh, 94%. Wow, awesome. 94% of you could really see the concept of there being a precipice. That is awesome. Thank you so much for your participation in that poll. I greatly appreciate it. That will help me considerably. Okay, so we were pre-pandemic before, so let's fast forward to post-pandemic. Post-pandemic, we are losing tacit knowledge in a number of ways. This list of ways is not absolute, but just what I see as the most relative areas of concern in this season. And some of these points, we touched on them earlier. We are losing tacit knowledge through the unfortunate deaths of people from the pandemic, and people being out on extended leave, and people being out caring for loved ones during this pandemic. And the next bullet is unemployment. To survive the economic hardship of the pandemic, some organizations have laid off hundreds of people at a time. As of January 2021, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics reported 10.1 million people unemployed. With those unemployed people went tacit knowledge. Let's see here, the projected baby boomers, we touched on this bullet earlier. It's between 30 and 40 million by the year 2025. And keep in mind, that's with or without them transferring their tacit knowledge. Generational gaps, we touched on this one a little bit earlier. The moving tide of generational gaps was also a hindrance to transferring tacit knowledge in my research. Generational diversity must stay at the forefront of HR professionals' agenda. So organizational culture, heavily relying on job aids or explicit knowledge to completely teach a new employee, impacts the organization in areas of assimilation, which can segue into attrition issues if not addressed. High usage of technology instead of interactive relationships, if not done with care, may cost organizations in the long run. Just because employees are having Microsoft Teams and Zoom meetings back to back all day does not mean they are transferring tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is about the quality of communication, not the quantity. So let me make a caveat here. There are some organizations who are in the all virtual workplace and are very successful with their models. Online retailers or e-commerce giants such as Amazon. Founded in 1994, Amazon has perfected their virtual venture in the past 26 years and are actually thriving amidst the pandemic. North Central University was born in the all virtual workspace in 1996. So they have had over 25 years to really tease through and learn what works best for their model. But please note, higher education, such as universities, mainly deal with and teach explicit knowledge, the textbook on a subject. From the textbook, a test can be given even if an instructor and student have never talked. The information being taught is explicit knowledge. It is codifiable, written down, formal learning. Where tacit knowledge is an added bonus to higher education is in the classroom or in an asynchronous online environment where the instructor is present and can fill in the blanks of the theory with practical experiences from their life. The Performance Company out of Australia. This company started in 1994 in a traditional office space, but then converted to an all virtual environment in 2006. When the Performance Company decided to make the sea change in their operation model, there was no Zoom, there was no Teams, no instant messaging, etc. Technology had not blossomed into what it is today. Catherine Matisky, founder and CEO, has led her organization 26 years total and 14 years totally virtual into great success. While all three of these entities are success stories in the all virtual workplace, as you can see, the proficiency of their virtual success did not come overnight, but took years. So, who's at risk? I have been asked, what industries or roles are at risk by this disruptive shift into the all virtual work environment. Currently, there is not one answer that fits all, but there are categories of concern. At risk are organizations who transitioned into the all virtual work environment due to the pandemic, organizations who transitioned and decide to stay in the all virtual work environment permanently. Guess who else? Organizations who pre-pandemic were already grappling with transferring tacit knowledge. Any organization where tacit knowledge was previously transferred in person are at risk until mitigated. For example, advisory and consulting services, where the foot soldiers are programmed to walk the halls of their clients, soak up the culture, and get to know their clients well. How will they teach fledglings of their future generations of virtual new hires to do that? What will be their alternative route of building client relationships without Zooming them all day? How will organizations start and nurture new relationships being in the all virtual workplace? So we have covered the what we are losing, we have covered the why we are losing it, and we have covered who is at risk. Let's look at the when and the how. The when and the how are somewhat intertwined. We will use the allegory of a ripple, as we have seen at some point in our lives. The ripple is caused by the impact of an object falling or being dropped into water, such as a rock. That impact generates a frequency that causes the ripple formation. In this scenario, we will use the ripple to illustrate the pattern of movement in correlation to the pandemic, virtual new hires, and the loss of tacit knowledge in the all virtual workplace. So the theoretical framework for this discussion is the diminishing ripple effect. In the middle of the ripple, we have the impact zone. The pandemic is the object that caused our impact zone because it has disrupted and leveled our traditional way of doing business in the office. Hence, it has a direct impact on transferring tacit knowledge. The ripple has troughs at the bottom of the ripple, and then the ripple also has peaks that are called the amplitude or the height of the ripple. Notice as the ripple travels outward away from the impact zone, that the ripple is actually losing strength and amplitude and is progressively distorted the further out it goes. This is a representation of the tacit knowledge transfer crisis just up ahead. So putting all of the pieces together, the troughs now represent the tacit knowledge. The amplitude or height of the ripple indicated by the golden rings it now represents each round of future virtual new hires onboarded with an organization. The diminishing ripple effect indicates that the further out you go, here's the tacit knowledge, the further out you go from the impact zone, the weaker the tacit knowledge signal will be for future generations of all virtual new hires. Like the iterations of the ripple, we are now siloed and not positioned for socialization or informal learning. We are immersed in our own personal cultures and on a collision for the year 2025. Let's look at the definition of these generations to be on the same page and to be clear. Moving clockwise, starting in the upper left-hand corner, the first generation of virtual workers are those who actually made the transition from the office space into the all virtual environment. This group of people are tacit knowledge rich, will have the most building blocks of tacit knowledge, will have the most vivid memories and behaviors that reflect the organization's culture. The second generation are those hired once the organization has already transitioned into the all virtual workplace. First in the door after the transition, these people have never been in the office and walked the halls, but were mailed or picked up their org laptops and did their new hire training online. And in like manner, it is for the third and fourth generation and fifth and sixth and so on. They've never been in the office. They've never walked the halls. And actually, that's where we see generations moving further and further and further away from the impact zone, and where that tacit knowledge signal is getting weaker and weaker. And so, how can we hang on to our tacit knowledge? The answer to that question relies heavily upon how the leadership of each organization reactively or proactively responds to the problem. Organizations must prevent the erosion of organizational culture and the disillusion of interactive relationships as it relates to the all virtual work environment. By the time some organizations realize that workflows, communications, and organizational effectiveness is a little disjointed in their virtual workplace, they have already succumbed to the loss of tacit knowledge and will then be in reactive mode, losing productivity, competitive advantage, and future state sustainability. The good news is there is a proactive approach to the problem because tacit knowledge preservation is a call to action. Organizations who are new to the all virtual work environment must define and design their virtual culture. Organizational culture is needed to sustain the pillars, principles, and precepts highly valued by org leadership and will be the framework for how tacit knowledge connects. A square peg of yesterday's office environment cannot fit in the round hole of the digital frontier. There has to be a long-term strategic approach that purposefully raises the awareness of the importance of tacit knowledge and educate the org populace on hindrances and how to counterbalance the hindrances. For example, let's build that point out a little bit. Let's take one of the hindrances, which was generational gaps. There are still places where there are four generations within the workplace, and that spans over 60 years. So it is plausible how generations can naturally clash or seem so different from each other. Major social events and world events unique to each generation helped shape their psyche and tactical approach to this world. So we can create a series of trainings and virtual activities addressing the hindrances. So in this chart, this is page 17 in my dissertation, where we just laid out the different generations that are currently in the workplace. But even if we were to do a training series on generations and just talk about the different attitudes, but then we could talk about some of the things that shape the different attitudes, the different wars or the different major events, the Great Depression, the Civil Rights, Watergate and Y2K and technology boom. All of these things molded the psyche, like I said, in the tactical approach of these generations differently. So then they approach the workplace differently. But if we can just work on hammering down these differences and explaining them to everyone and how that really affects the flow of tacit knowledge, we can kind of narrow that gap. The next proactive approach, we can look to retooling to reposition for socialization and equipping the org populace to interact in informal ways. That's an imperative. Virtual team activities are a great way to build, morale and educate and provide a way for people to cross-pollinate in an informal way. There are several software packages out there that can, facilitate and host such activities. As Trello is a great software package that provides an organization the flexibility to have open channels for people to talk about any topic. You can have virtual coffees, post pics of fun times, create a food channel and trade recipes. Also, Trello can help your organization get rid of emails in its entirety and streamline project management. Slack is another software that facilitates informal discussions as well as other forms of collaboration. One of my favorite software packages is Waggle. This is a great software, whereas leadership can administer survey to the entire organization or just to a team and see in real time the results of the responses. And that's how they can quickly get a pulse on opinions and suggestion from employees. Employees taking the survey can also see the results in real time, see what their colleagues responded. So the above activities and others creates the space. We have to have space created for these activities to happen, to transfer the tacit knowledge. Organizations will want to consider allotting time for people to be social, such as virtual coffee breaks. That adds value to the morale and the mission of transferring tacit knowledge. Leadership has to operate in heightened emotional, cultural, social leadership, and cognitive intelligences to build trust and accountability in the all virtual workplace. So I just wanted to say my consultancy, the Hedgspeth Group, is dedicated to assessing and customizing tacit-friendly solutions. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, first and foremost, I just have to say your presentation as a whole and your PowerPoint presentation is one of the best I've seen in a very long time. And several people in the chat had also mentioned how much they loved your PowerPoint and how engaging it was and aesthetically pleasing. So thank you for that. Delivering your information in that format was great.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I have a couple of things. I know that Dr. Hedgspeth has asked me to put her email in the chat, so I will do that, but we're going to get to some of these questions because there's several in the Q&A. Let me see. Let me start with, I believe Timothy's got the first question here.
Okay.
So Timothy asked in the Q&A, how do we efficiently store tacit knowledge and effectively transfer it to others?
Yeah, see, that's the big one, Timothy, because it is not codifiable. It's not like explicit knowledge where you can, just write down the steps and put it in a database somewhere. A lot of times people don't even know they have the tacit knowledge until a situation draws it out of them. That's why with this pandemic, I'm saying that we could lose our tacit knowledge because historically it's been transferred through observation. Like if I'm sitting next to you, Timothy, at the job, and you're new to the job, but an emergent situation arises, you're close by to see me interact or see me react, to spring into action and solve it, to listen to my logic, and you can ask questions. So tacit knowledge is really transferred through mentoring, coaching, observation, informal chats. It's those things that we do inside the office that we are now no longer able to do. That's why it's so frightening to me. And I'm kind of sounding the alarm for, organizations to now start paying attention to your tacit knowledge, because there is no database for it. There's no repository for it. We can, make job aids and make them as detailed as possible, but there's going to always be a situation that'll come up that's not written, because you can't think to write everything that you know about one little instance, for future generations. It's just not possible. That's like an infinite number of ways you could write that manual on one topic. So, but I know that in like the Bethune study, I think it was the Bethune study. No, it was the other one, the Ratliff study. They supported, trying to use a knowledge management database as much as possible. But there again, there's no way you can capture 100% of your tacit knowledge. Did I answer the question?
I think you left it. I think you left it wide open there when you said that's the big question. Just so you know, I did throw Dr. Hedgspeth email in the chat. So if you need to have access to that, and Timothy does have a follow-up question in the Q&A. So I'm just going to keep going right down the queue because there are several in there right now. Timothy says, my 2019 dissertation found a significant relationship between the overall creating, capturing, and reusing project knowledge management, process and project success, whereas no significant relationship existed between the transferring project knowledge management process and the project success. So I think more or less this is just a follow-up to his question originally, and just saying that he found there was no significant relationship that existed between transferring PKM and project success.
Okay, so project success, but that may have been based not to, and I would love to talk with you more on that, Timothy. Does not necessarily mean that you guys could have executed tasks that required explicit knowledge, like programming. There's a part of that that's highly, explicit knowledge where people can share, and then some of it is tacit knowledge. So I would be interested to talk with you to dive deeper into that, and get more information on that, Timothy. So please email me.
Okay, absolutely. And then a couple of other questions, and you can let me know. We have Greg Mitchell, who has asked in the Q&A, says, maybe an odd question, but how does posting food posts or recipes help reduce the risk of businesses losing tacit knowledge?
Well, you know what? That can kind of seem irrelevant. But what that was, I took that actually from a podcast that I did with Catherine Matitsky, who is the owner of the performance company that was in one of my slides. And she was just saying at her company, to bolster just socialization, creating conversations. Those were some of the informal, because remember, tacit knowledge is transferred through informal conversations. So you've got to create the space for those informal conversations. And then she was saying at first she was a little adverse to that. And she was like, oh, that's wasting time, but then she learned in the long haul that, no, wait a minute, there's something to this. There's really something to this. And so the team, it was a great team builder, as a matter of fact. So from that, her team actually took on another project of while they're working, they do this walk around the world. They walked from Florida, and it's digital, from Florida to New York, then from Florida to California, and now they're doing around the world. But it's just team building activities that keep people, that builds a cohesion so that you can transfer that tacit knowledge. It was just ideas of informal discussions. That's all.
Okay. There are a few questions about the AI. One's in the QA and one's in the chat, so I'm just going to kind of group them together. What are your thoughts about the effect of robotic process automation and artificial intelligence on tacit knowledge creation, capture, storage, or transfer within organizations?
You know what? That is a good question as well. Thank you for asking, because I think that AI has a place. I think it has a place, but I don't think that it can really totally replace humans, though, because AI is still a program. We call it AI, and we give it, we attribute to it all of these human type, characteristics, but it's still a program. So I don't really see it being able to. I don't see it being able to take the place of humans transferring tacit knowledge. I really don't. But that's a good question. So if you have any information on that, or a particular article you think would be of good interest to me, please email it to me. I'm open. I'm open to learning more.
And this is maybe along those lines too, so it might be an email conversation. But Jay mentions in the chat, this insight is awesome. It appears to me that AI development is attempting to, in some fashion, use what is known to teach and diagnose. Can you please address AI as a replacement for the significant percentage of tacit knowledge?
Yeah, you know what, Jay, I really don't see that happening, because tacit knowledge comes from experience. And then as human beings, we have the ability to be agile. And I know that AI, can probably one or two deviations from being a robot. Maybe, I don't know what the actual probability or stat is on that, how many deviations they are, from that. But I would say there's just no way that it can completely replace us. What it is, we may accept not knowing certain things, and then have our services or whatever it's providing, dialed back. But the full breadth of what a human can do, or a human, how agile we are with our minds, I don't see it right now in 2021. I don't know what they'll create later on, but in 2021, I don't think so. But again, if you have more information, you have another study, please email it to me. I'd be willing to take a look at it, because I never thought about AI and AI as far as tacit knowledge, because we're already having issues with tacit knowledge being transferred human being to human being. So I really don't see us having a victory of machines being able to do that anytime soon.
And then I have a couple, there's several questions in the Q&A, just so you know.
Thank you for the questions.
Yes, yeah. So Fatine asks, and forgive me if we need further clarification, maybe Fatine can write in the chat, but it says, can you share the name of these, of the app? There was an app maybe that you were referring to? Yeah,
there were three apps. Trello, 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 and then Slack, Slack, and then Waggle, Waggl, Waggle. That's the one where you can administer a survey and see the real-time results.
I did post that in the chat too for folks as well, for
Thank
reference.
you so much, Emily. Thank you.
And then we have Charmaine has asked, so how can we help keep the tacit environment alive in the virtual environment?
I know, and that's the big siren of this message, is for organizations to start proactively, just proactively creating channels and activities for that to happen. Because what I understand from, I talked to some people in one organization that they are on Zoom back to back to back, back to back to back all day until from the time they log on, which, I mean, that's a lot of busyness, and it's very transactional oriented and it's task oriented. But the way they're describing it to me, they're almost out of breath. They don't have time for lunch. It's an exhausting situation. So that's why I said all that busyness, tacit knowledge is about the quality of communication, not the quantity.
Hmm.
So organizations, I think, have to be proactive, like, again, creating those open channels of informal discussions, virtual coffees, or just virtual coffees, and the title be, so what's new in the industry? Just somewhere where everybody can muster together on your team and not be pressured to talk about the task that's on their desk, but create the space for informal. So that, to me, that's right now in this day, the tip of the solution is just to start those, facilitate those informal conversations. Because some people are going to stay virtual. So it'll be long term. Their solutions are going to be long term, that, yeah, they'll have a coffee every week, maybe on Mondays or Fridays or whatever.
That's so true. Elaine asks, is institutional knowledge the same thing as tacit knowledge?
No, it is very different. Thank you, Elaine, for that question. It is very different. And that's exactly what organizations want to do. They want to help individuals pour out that personal knowledge and make it institutional knowledge. But that's a hard thing to do, because who sits there and pours out absolutely everything they can possibly think of? I mean, we can start by making job aids, and of course we can amend them. But that's a huge undertaking. But that's actually what needs to happen, because as the baby boomers are retiring, the transfer of tacit knowledge was an issue way before the pandemic. Fortune 500 companies were losing $31.5 billion annually due to employees not sharing knowledge. That's specifically why I say part of the solution is that we have to raise awareness among the organizational populace about tacit knowledge, tell them what it is, and say, hey, here are some of the hindrances. And this is why we have the hindrances. So, so that everyone's aware, and so that everyone can kind of be proactive with the solution. Because with contractors walking out the door, baby boomers retiring, the workplace being 75% millennials in 2025, and that's with or without them having that tacit knowledge, because I was reading literature on where it was not being passed to them, we have an issue. So everyone has to do their part. That's why organizations need to create like a series of training, just a training series. And each training series is labeled one of the hindrances. And we really break that down. And we really break it down to try to close the gap and preserve some of that organizational knowledge. Thank you, Elaine.
And I'm sorry, forgive me, Elaine. There's like 11 questions in the Q&A, and all the way down at the very bottom, Elaine says, correction, is institutional knowledge the same as explicit knowledge? She had a correction on her own question.
Oh,
So sorry about that, Elaine, but we addressed your first one.
Yeah, we did.
Is
Is institutional knowledge the same as explicit
knowledge?
Yeah, it can be, because institutional knowledge is, job aids, manuals. It's knowledge on how to do things, how to work the machinery, if you're in manufacturing or whatever. Yes.
Okay, great. And then there's just a few more, since we have a few more minutes. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to everything, but I will throw her email in the chat again, just in case you miss it the first time around. Raymond asks, how can we create or access this or get the organic spaces to transfer tacit knowledge at NCU? And I would just like to say one thing before she chimes in, if she has other suggestions. But don't forget, the Commons is supposed to be a place where we are allowed to communicate and have our coffee talks at the university. So don't forget about that place as a resource for you. But is there something else that you experienced as a student when you were here pursuing your doctorate degree?
You know what? Just the commons, really. I think that perhaps maybe the dean or someone may want to look at a special project with the maybe even with the alumni, where we do a tacit knowledge push in tandem with the commons, but right now just the commons is all I can think of. That's where I wanted to go when I wanted to troll,
Yeah.
just general conversations.
Yes, yeah, and just to check it out, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Melody asks, how can we allow for and promote opportunities for social connections in the virtual workspace? And I like the coffee talk. Are there other things that you're suggesting that might be helpful for the virtual workspace?
Yeah, we can do I'm envisioning this thing, and I meant to really articulate it on paper. Thank you. First, thank you for your question, Melody. Um, we can still do all sorts of parties and get-togethers. And we can make it so fun because we can still do games. Like, say, if I had a team of maybe 8, 10 people, we can still do word cloud activities, within that. And then once we do some word cloud activities, we can do breakout sessions where, okay, I'm going to put 2 baby boomers and 2 millennials in this room. I'm going to take the traditionalists that's online, put them with, millennials, and everybody has an assignment once they get into the breakout rooms. And then when we all come back together, just make it fun, dollar store prizes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my gosh, that's a great idea too. Just trying to find those spaces
yeah,
where we can
easily
share that knowledge.
we can easily create them with breakout spaces. We can do a block party on Zoom, have a little playlist going on, or we can do a scavenger hunt. Even on Zoom, we can do a scavenger hunt. It's all sorts of ways we can do this.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And
Mhm.
I do have to tell you, Dr. Hedgspeth, there's so many more questions in the Q&A. So if people do still want to reach out, you're more than welcome to email. I'm going to go ahead and throw that in the chat one last time just to make sure people have it.
And it's right behind me as well.
Okay, very good.
Whichever way it is, it's behind me.
We're this way. And we just thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with in this area with tacit knowledge and getting our brains to turn and think about this and how we can incorporate it in our virtual world, or if people return back to in-office spaces, how we can be more cognizant of it.
Exactly. It will still be applicable then as well.
Absolutely. And as a reminder, the webinar is recorded, and I will go ahead and post the link in the comments for you, and it will be also housed in our LibGuides, which is where we'll be housing all of our webinars moving forward. And we thank you so much for your time, Dr. Hedgspeth, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much for your questions, and I greatly appreciate your help, Emily.
Bye-bye.